on, a father-son trip. It'll be fun.
Yeah, right.
You know, most people don't have the luxury of just picking up and leaving it all behind, Daniel.
People have walked the path for over 1,000 years. The way is a very personal journey, Mr. Avery.
Daniel was my only child. We're gonna walk the Camino de Santiago, both of us.
Coming out of the pandemic, it felt like this movie needed to be rediscovered. And I think people are hitting the reset button. I think they're trying to figure out what the next part of their lives are looking like. And this movie sort of feels like the kind of film that we need more than we've ever needed it, because it's about reflection, it's about self-examination, it's about taking a long walk and trying to figure out what your place is in the world.
Hello and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Ann Hornaday, Chief Film Critic here at the Post, and it is my great good pleasure to be joined today by the actors Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez. Emilio is the writer and director of the 2011 film The Way, full disclosure of which I'm a huge fan, in which also stars his father, Martin Sheen. And as we saw in that introduction, Emilio is also responsible for the movie's re-release tomorrow, May 16th, which is great news for the many, many fans of this movie. Martin Sheen, Emilio Estevez, welcome to Washington Post Live.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Delighted to be here. Thank you for those good words.
Not at all.
Thank you, Ann.
It's a pleasure. We all connected when The Way first came out. We had a fun bus ride together from the wilds of Northern Virginia into Washington, D.C. That was a highlight for me, and it's just really nice to reconnect with both of you. So Emilio, let's start with you. And we saw a little clip there of your speaking with Jennifer Hudson about why now, but tell us a little bit more about how this all came together and what motivated you to re-release The Way right now.
Well, the film was essentially sitting in movie jail for the last couple of years. It had been involved in a bankruptcy and a court case where it was sitting in a Delaware court where it was a motion to abandon rights. My term had ended with the previous distributor in addition to that. And so I got a call from a company, boutique distribution company called Ocean Avenue. A guy named Chris Bueno writes to me and says, "Hey man, I think I can rescue your movie out of this movie jail." And so we set about doing just that. Enter Fathom Events, who said, "We understand you guys are endeavoring to get this movie back out there. We realize it's been taken down off of all the streaming sites. It is difficult to find a DVD. We would like to release your film back out on screens." And so consequently, here we are. The night of May 16th, we're out on almost 1,000 screens across the country, which is bigger than the movie ever had the opportunity to be released when it was first released in 2011.
You know, that's a great story, and it fills me with hope and joy. You know that these orphan films or these lost gems aren't always lost, and that they do have advocates and ways back. And I mean, I think over the years, one of the questions I get asked most often is where's another movie like The Way? I mean, people fell in love with this film, those who were lucky enough to see it. Martin, what do you think the resonance of the movie is today? I mean, it was so prescient in so many ways. And then as Emilio said in the Jennifer Hudson interview, it speaks to our present moment. Just
Very,
acutely.
very much so. Yeah, very much so. I think that people are looking for something that was sort of heightened during the pandemic when people began to hear the birds again and smell clean air, despite the horror of the pandemic and so many deaths. And so they were rejuvenated when the pandemic ended, and they were permitted to go outside their homes, and then they wanted to go outside themselves. They wanted to touch that sense of the sacred that exists in all of us. They wanted to find a way, as I often say, to unite the will of the spirit with the work of the flesh. And that's what pilgrimage is all about. The flesh is walking, the spirit is listening, and they come together and they form community with all the other pilgrims in front, behind, and right and left of you for the 500 miles from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Santiago de Compostela. But it is a journey inside as well as a physical journey outside.
Indeed. Emilio, I would like to play a clip right now, which gets to a little bit of what Martin was just talking about. And speaking of prescience, you'll see this shows how ahead of its time the movie really was. We'll come back after the clip.
One of the guys said you're Canadian.
Don't spread it around, eh? So how's it going for you out there on the road, Boomer?
I'm Tom.
You know, isn't Baby Boomer? You got all those horrible signs of that desperate generation taking its final breath, trying to screw the rest of us over one last time. Only thing missing from you, Boomer, is one of those stupid-looking ponytails and a collection of James Taylor songs on your iPod.
I like James Taylor, but I don't have an iPod.
Well, that's pretty amazing. What, no iPod, no cell phone or computer to keep you connected? Isn't it written somewhere in the Baby Boomer code book that you must own a certain percentage of anything Steve Jobs makes? So what is it, on pilgrimage to change your life?
Something like that.
Wait, don't tell me. Just getting over a nasty divorce and she took it all. Or maybe you're out to meet some young chicks and relive your college glory days. Believe me, I've seen plenty of that nonsense. Oh, I got it. You're seeking penance for screwing over your company retirees in some stock market scandal.
You sound really angry.
Yeah, sure, I'm angry. I gotta quit these. And I'm really, really angry about that. And when we get to Santiago de Compostela, it's all over for you, my little friend. You're a goner. The end of the Camino is the end of my addiction.
Spoken like a true addict.
Spoken like someone who took 10 days to get this far.
Well, at that pace, you should get to Santiago by the end of the year.
He's on to our plan.
And of course, that's the great Deborah Kara Unger, who is just so sensational in this movie. Great
Beautiful.
scene.
It's a wonderful scene. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
There's a lot going on in that scene, my friend. Beautifully written, beautifully acted and directed.
Thank you.
And that dialogue, I mean, it gets so much to this generational divide we're experiencing now with you can see a Gen Zer, right? Saying the exact same things.
Okay, Boomer, right?
I'd forgotten that
Exactly.
scene. Yeah, yeah. And I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't seen the film, but we become friends as we go along, and she reveals a deep pain in her life and a great loss, and she's hoping to really recover it on the Camino. And it's the creation of community. That's what she's seeking, and she finds it. Yeah.
Emilio, the movie, we got hints of this in the trailer that we watched in the clips. This is a movie about a father and a son. And it's about, at the beginning, it's about a father who doesn't necessarily support his son's aspirations and doesn't understand them. Obviously, you and your father are extraordinarily close, and have had a great relationship. But have you ever been in that position of either having Martin or your mother Janet pushing back on one of your dreams, or?
I can honestly say that because I think both of them are artists. My mother she left Cleveland with a scholarship to the New School from the Kiwanis Club, and when she was 19, and she met my father, who had just arrived to New York and he had left Dayton. So both Buckeyes, both left Ohio for New York in search of themselves in search of discovering their art. And so when I started to sort of put my toe into the water and explore this idea of being an actor, being a storyteller, a director, a writer, they got me. They understood me. Unlike Tom, who doesn't understand his son, doesn't understand this idea that Daniel wants to go out and travel the world and give his life up in academia and experience life rather than spend time in school. And so, and isn't that interesting though? Tom can't meet his son halfway, and it takes the Camino and his son's death for him to now have to travel the entire distance to finally meet his son, discover who his son was, and become a father to these other pilgrims that he could never be to his son. But I would have to say, from my perspective, I was always encouraged as an artist to follow my dream. I think at one point my dad he says, "Well, what about law school? What about going to medical school?" And that just I grew up on film sets. I grew up in this immersive travel world where we didn't travel for leisure. We traveled because it was work. It was he got a job and the family went with him. And so it was sort of almost like a being a part of a circus, right? We sort of went, we set up tent, and we lived there for a while, and then we would come home, and then only to start it all over again. And so I didn't really know any other life than I caution to say show business, because I think it's important to say there's show and then there's business. I've always been uncomfortable with the show, but never the business. I love the business. I love the community. I love being part of that, setting up that circus tent, as I said, and going to work. And so,
Mm. We were just treated to some wonderful family photos from those years. And Martin, I'm fascinated by your decision and Janet's decision to take the family along. I mean, that was not necessarily the done thing, right? Could you walk us through what made you do, were there pros and cons you had to weigh?
Well, yeah, they were. Most of the films I was doing at that time were distant locations, so I knew that I'd be gone for a long time, and I felt the risk of leaving them behind would be something I couldn't bear, because in those days there were no cell phones. It was not easy to communicate. You had to get to from a hotel. You had to go through an operator, and I usually call collect. So I thought, we should experience these things together, and it often meant pulling them out of school as they got older, and that got more difficult, particularly in the Philippines, because we were there for so very long. But I still felt that at least we were together and we could share the pros and the cons of this more than being separated and not knowing what was going on. So that was the main motivation. I remember some locations, particularly for Badlands. We were in a little community called La Junta in Colorado for like 4 months, and we rented a home. And we became part of the community, and the kids were, they'd go down to the movies in the Saturday afternoon and come back, and they'd play in the park across the street. The neighbors would come in, and they were showing Janet how to make the homemade bread and ice cream at the, on in the mountain atmosphere, because it wasn't the same at sea level. And all of these things, they became part of our family history, and we would still relate to some of those days. Remember, Emilio started working on a farm in Colorado when he was 10 or 12. He was driving a tractor, for heaven's sakes. I mean, it was outrageous, and that sort of became our lifestyle. It was like sometimes, they would object to going on these distant locations, and sometimes they couldn't wait to get there because there was so much adventure that lay ahead. So yeah, there were advantages and disadvantages. But if I had to do over again, I think I'd do it the same way. I'd drag them along as long as I had the ability to find a place and keep us afloat.
That's wonderful. We do have a question from the audience. This is from Susan Zachariason of Utah. And Susan asks, this is for Martin, how much of the way the Camino did you walk and how hard was it?
Well, I have to confess, I never really walked the entire Camino. We started filming in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and we ended the filming in Morocco, actually. And the pilgrimage ended in Mushia. But as Emilio has often said, we did the Camino about 40 times, because when you're filming, you have to do coverage, you have to do wide angles, and a lot of the walking and climbing and sometimes swimming. And so we would have to do it over and over and over again for the coverage. And so although I did not earn a Compostela, which is the completed passport for the entire journey, I did earn the respect of the Camino for what I did do of it. I still long to do it. I would love to do it. I don't know if I'm beyond the age that could make it, but I'd still love to give it a try someday.
We reckon that we did about 200 miles. If you figure, sometimes the van would drop us off at one end of a village and then pick us up on the other side of it. But again, like Martin was saying, it would be take 1, take 2, take 3, and then it would be coverage, where a normal pilgrim just passes through a village one time. So yeah, exactly. we figure 250 miles of the actual Camino that we traveled.
Well, I think that is deserving of at least an honorary Compostela. But fascinatingly, this brings both of you kind of full circle with your family story, right? Martin's father is from Compostela, and Emilio, your son, I understand now lives in that area. Can you tell us a little bit about the family connection to this place?
My father was Gallego.
Well, sure.
He was a little village in northern Spain on the Portuguese border called Pararubias in Salto Revolta, near Tui, which is near Vigo, which is not that far from Santiago de Compostela. So yeah, we've been to that area many times over the years to visit our Galician relatives, and very, very close to that community. My sister Carmen lives in Madrid. She's a retired school teacher. She and her husband are both retired teachers in Madrid. And I'll leave the rest of the family connection to Spain to Emilio and his son Taylor.
Well, Taylor had gone to Spain to accompany my father during the hiatus, during the West Wing. He was working as his assistant at the time. And so my dad had always wanted to go to see what the Camino was all about, but they didn't have the time to actually walk it. So they rented a car and they drove along the Camino, and they stopped in a town called Burgos, which is, as the crow flies, about 2 hours north of Madrid, if you're looking at the map. And at this particular albergue, this place that takes in pilgrims for the night, they stayed, and my son met a young lady named Julia. He's 19 at the time, meets Julia, falls in love, decides to move to Spain, and lived there for 9 years. In fact, they got married in 2009, which was the year we started shooting the film. Taylor worked on the film. He was a co-producer on the movie. He was kind of our fixer along the route, because by that point he was very fluent in Spanish. And so he's stateside now, but certainly goes back and forth between the United States and Spain. His daughter, Alma, my granddaughter, is the sort of what I like to call the second miracle of this movie. The first, of course, Taylor and his wife meeting.
That is beautiful. I don't know if you're aware, Emilio. Obviously, we all know and love you and remember you from your years. I don't know. Do you like the term Brat Pack? Is it something you?
I don't, for a lot of different reasons. I think it sort of labeled us in a way that it was kind of unfair. It was sort of, kind of put us in a box to a certain extent. I think what's interesting and what's sort of not, it's actually in the article, and that is that John Hughes was interviewed for that particular article in the New York Magazine. And he talks about reading my script for Men at Work. Now, regardless of what anybody thinks about Men at Work, it's a silly comedy. However, John Hughes said, this script reminds me of something that I would have written. The humor, the dialogue, the relationship, the characters so that part was completely left out of the narrative of the entire Brat Pack of it all. And it was also, it was David Blum, the writer of the piece, even himself said that, who read that early draft of Men at Work, said the film was surprisingly sophisticated. It's too bad that his article about all of us was not.
Well, I take your point, so I will not use that term, but your fellow actor from that time, Andrew McCarthy, also did the Camino with his son, and he joined us last week, I think it was, about that journey. And I just am wondering if you have spoken with him about that, if you've connected around this subject.
I have. In fact, you know, the interesting thing about his journey on Camino, on pilgrimage, is that he found himself on the Camino. He became a writer and found the writer in himself, much like Paulo Coelho did after he did the pilgrimage and wrote. In fact, he wrote the pilgrimage. So again, we see how the Camino de Santiago influences people, inspires people to become themselves. And that's really the overall and overarching theme of the film.
Yeah. Incidentally, somebody sent me a copy of Andrew's book. I'm halfway through it, and I'm having all of these memories of our time. He's in all those places and seeing all those things that we saw and did, and it's quite extraordinary. He's terrific.
He's a wonderful writer, it's true. Martin, you know, when we met Lo those many years ago on the bus, we talked about religion and spiritual practice, and you are a practicing Catholic.
I'm going to write someday.
I hear you. I hear you. We're all pilgrims. But I wonder what it's like to be a man of faith and a person of faith in godless Hollywood. And I don't know how godless it really is. I mean, do you have a community there of fellow believers and practitioners?
I belong to a small parish. A lot of people don't know there's a Catholic church in Malibu. It's called Our Lady of Malibu, and it's my home parish, and they're very active in social justice, and it's a very vibrant community. There's a school from kindergarten to 8th grade, and we just had the first communion class, and it's a very nourishing, very beautiful community. The larger community in my life is of course family, but the community of artists, I don't ever think of myself as working or living or belonging or in any way really associated with Hollywood per se. I mean, that's a community. It involves a whole lot of other professions as well as movie studios and actors and entertainment. So I think that there are, enough truly creative people who are nourished by their spirituality, which is reflected in their work, and that's Hollywood. As much as people make tank shells in Pennsylvania. It's like it's a reflection of who we are, where we come from, what we stand for, and what we strive for, and that is a connection to our humanity, that the deepest part of ourselves. And for my own part, I've been an actor all of my life. I have no memory of ever being not an actor. I couldn't identify it when I was a child. I started going to the movies. I was 5 or 6, and gradually it dawned on me that I was like those people up on the screen, and I knew something about myself then that I cherished. I was possessed by this image of myself being part of that community, and it possessed me. And I knew that if I did not pursue it, I would never be happy. And that's been the case. And the longer I'm at it, I'm long over the retirement age, but I love it. I love it as much today as I did when I started, because it nurtures the deepest part of my humanity, my spirit, and it unites that thing I talked about before. It's always united the will of the spirit with the work of the flesh, and it's like a form of prayer, my profession. And I know that there are most of the people in this profession have that sense of it. They may not articulate it the same way I would, but we're creative people, and this is how we sustain our spirituality and our life force. And I think it shows in a lot of the work that some of the great actors of my generation are still doing it today, and it's quite extraordinary to see Al Pacino and Bobby De Niro, to just name two of the greats of my generation, who are still nourished by what they do, and they nourish us. It's always a journey inside, and we see ourselves, the very best and the very worst part of ourselves. And when we see the brokenness, I consider it blessed brokenness, and that's the only way that the spirit can enter, is through a broken part. That's how God gets in, and that's how, whether you believe in God or not, whether the one, the other, the unit, whatever it is, that higher power, that's the only way it gets in, is through the brokenness. So I cherish the brokenness, and I nourish the spirit that allows that energy to flow, that great mystery of just being alive.
And Ann, I would say I would add to that, there is nothing like watching Martin on a set. First of all, he's never met a stranger, so you have to call him to set 10 minutes before you need him, because he's saying hello to everybody. Hey, where are you from? How you doing? Wow, what's going on? So there's all of that. But his energy, just his life force, you just see it, you feel him, when he's on the set, and he's just so excited to be on set and to be in that character, but sometimes not in that character. Sometimes it was very difficult for him to play this character of Tom, who's a little prickly, he's kind of a grump, and he wanted to be Martin. And I was like, Dad, you're not you. You will become you by the end. You'll evolve by the end of this, but you are this country club guy. You are this, you're this arch conservative. You're a guy who's not in the world. You will evolve. But in the meantime, I need you to be grumpy Martin, not Tom by the end of the movie.
I couldn't help noticing in that earlier scene, it's like, wow, that was a stretch, because you are not that guy. You are not that guy. Anybody who knows you or has watched you on screen. I have time for one last question, and it gets back to these. It's extraordinary to me that both of you have been a part of movies, and in the case of the West Wing, television shows that are really generational touchstones. You have been a part of movies that just capture people's experience and take hold in a way that live on in our imaginations and stand for something. And Emilio, I guess I'll direct this to you, and I'd love to hear from Martin too. Is that still possible, in this kind of fractured, siloed media culture that we're in? Is that kind of movie or cultural product even still doable?
Well, I think by the very nature of us talking about this movie 12 years after the initial release, I think the short answer is yes. I think that if you can make a film that transcends generations, that moves through time, that is still relevant 10 years, 20 years, 30 years after you made it. I mean, look at this year is going to be the 40th anniversary of The Outsiders. When you're a young actor, and I think my father can attest to this as well, you're just happy that the casting director said yes. So it's not necessarily part of this plan. It's luck, it's timing. And I think, again, who knew that we would still be talking about Apocalypse Now 40 years later, or Breakfast Club 30 years later, and The Way, I believe, is that kind of movie that it's going to outlive everybody who's listed in those credits.
Well, I couldn't agree more. People who are fans of The Way, I know will be flocking to see it again tomorrow. People who haven't, I strongly recommend that you do, because you won't forget it. And unfortunately, we do have to leave that there, so we'll have to leave it there. Martin Sheen, Emilio Estevez, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thanks so much, and thank you for your continued support on this. It really means a lot to both of us.
Here, here. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching. To check out what interviews we have coming up, please head over to WashingtonPostLive.com to register and find out more information about our upcoming programs. For now, I'm Ann Hornaday. Thank you again for joining us.